The parable of the mustard seed. The parable of the mustard seed is for the birds. The parable of the mustard seed. How many of you had heard of it before today? All right. So many of you have heard of it, had heard of it. The next question, how many of you remembered its general lesson? And to be sure, friends, I'm not testing you or trying to get any of you to feel bad about not remembering something in the Bible. I forget stories and basic details in the Bible all the time. So at any rate, some of you had heard of the parable of the mustard seed. And the next question, how many of you remembered its main lesson? Some general comfort there. All right. I would be willing to bet, for those of you who semi-raised your hand, I'd be willing to bet that most of you remembered it this way, because it's often remembered this way, that the mustard seed is really small, but it grows into a big tree. And therefore, in faith, even something with small, modest beginnings can end up big and grand. The mustard seed parable is often remembered that way. And that would be a main point of this parable. It's a common and it's a proper takeaway. In fact, one scholar of Jesus' parables writes, the mustard seed is often called the parable of growth, with small beginnings and big endings. And another scholar of the New Testament adds, the reign of God may seem like sheer weakness, no more than an insignificant mustard seed. But take heart. Don't be deceived by modest beginnings. Its final summation, its endings, will be great. So it is true. The assertion seems to be, from the parable, that in God's kingdom, something small and humble can turn to something grand. But what is fascinating to me is that as famous as this parable is, and as short as it is, there is one critical piece of the parable that is constantly overlooked, under-remembered, and under-emphasized. And it's the parable's conclusion in the last line. The mustard seed grows to be the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree. And that's where most of our memories end for the parable. But it continues. It becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. The mustard seed parable is for the birds. For some reason, though, I forget that almost every time. Multiple biblical scholars that I consulted didn't or barely even mentioned the birds. That line is so often excluded from our basic summaries and memories of the parable. And I don't know why. I wonder why. Maybe it's because we're so quick to individualize and personalize our faith. Maybe we hear of the becoming of the seed into a great tree, and it's easy to view ourselves as the mustard seed, and we hope for our own personal growth in faith, growth in achievement, growth in joy, whatever it may be. I don't know why this is so often forgotten and emphasized, the line about the birds. But again, it isn't totally correct to personalize this parable, or totally incorrect, I should say. It's not totally incorrect to personalize this parable and view it as hope for growth. This is a parable about becoming and what God can grow in God's kingdom. But growth for what? That might be the most important question when encountering this parable. Growth for what? The parable tells us the seed becomes a great tree so that birds of the air can make nests in its branches. So, my friends, Jesus is teaching us that the kingdom of heaven here on earth is when surprising new life and growth happens. personally, individually, or as a community. And that growth, the growth of our faith, the growth of discipleship, the growth of the church, the growth of our very own lives, whatever the growth is, the parable of the mustard seed tells us that that growth has a purpose. And according to the last line in the mustard seed parable, that purpose is to serve others in God's creation. The mustard seed didn't grow into something powerful and beautiful unto itself. Its growth ultimately served beyond itself for the birds. The kingdom of heaven, says Jesus, is like a mustard seed, where something seemingly tiny and meek can still grow into something that takes care of others. That is God's vision for you and for me and for the church. With God, we can grow and have new life. And not just for our own personal sake or only for our own enjoyment and fulfillment, but our becoming in this life, our growth in this life, is ultimately meant for others. So this calls us to task a little bit, but it's also really hopeful. No matter how small or insignificant we may think we are, or how small or insignificant we may think an action of ours can be, we always have the possibility of growth and new life, and we always have the capacity to enact God's goodness and love in this world. So with the whole of the parable in mind now, I want to lift a mustard seed here at FLC that we have seen grow into a great tree. And such growth has indeed served others beyond ourselves. The noisy offering. Our youngest members, or youngest at heart for this crew, and our smallest coins. How could such small seeds have an impact? Every worship service for the last 12 months, we have asked for your loose change if and when you're able to give it. Change from your car's center console, change found in the deep of your purse, change from the laundry room or mason jars, change from your couch cushions. Change that was a small sacrifice for you, or change that maybe was a level of money you didn't even notice. Pennies, dimes, quarters, and small bills. Add it all up over 12 months, and those mustard seeds became well over $6,000 in change. $6,000 in mustard seeds that were sent beyond these walls to organizations doing huge things in this community and around the world. $6,000 of mustard seeds for feeding starving children, for Lutheran disaster response, for Lutheran social service, for Lutheran World Relief, for the Fuller Center of Housing right here in Detroit Lakes, for food, resources, and shelter for the poor and the desperate and the fleeing that come to our doors, for ELCA seminaries, for global health, for our local food shelf, for our kids in VBS or on mission trips, for the Boys and Girls Club of Detroit Lakes. $6,000, all from pocket change for all kinds of birds. Jesus says that is what the kingdom of heaven is like. Amen.